I tend to roll my eyes when I see someone vaping because it just seems so hipster douchebaggy. But
That is something we haven't talked about. My disdain for hipsters.
how often in Florida do you run into hipsters?
I don't, which is definitely one of the benefits of being down in South Florida. Like, there's not a lot of hipsters. So I don't have a big problem with hipsters, but I don't want to try your shitty homemade beer that tastes like Labrador, right?
Right, exactly.
It's like, oh, can you taste the chocolate and the Labrador in my beer? It's like, I don't want that.
Uninterested in that.
Don't give me a shitty beer. I'll just buy some, right? Like, so, yeah. Hipsters bother me.
I think there are times when I think the hipster aesthetic, I'm like, it's so try hard, but I don't hate it. Like, I don't mind looking at a hipster sometimes, but and I can't really, because like fashion wise, I'm not against it, right? Like, I think they can look good, but also there's times when I don't mind try hards, like theater kids. Theater kids don't bug me in the way that theater kids seem to bug a lot of people, and they're trying so hard, and I don't mind that for some reason. But hipsters, for some reason I mind that they're trying so hard.
See, I'm a jock, but I'm a little bit different. I'm a British jock, right? So I'm not like that classic American jock who's supposed to hate all other groups. I love the theater group. I think they're awesome, right? And Glee made it cool again, right? For Americans. Well, but yeah, I just have a problem with hipsters. I don't like the attire.
Okay.
I really don't.
Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human elements. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of two better people to do that than Kevin and I.
And actually, this week there are three of us to do just that. Joining us is Mare, a VP of HR at a New York City holding company that will remain nameless. Say hi, Mare.
Hi, Kevin.
But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call Market Analysis, where we look at a product or app or technology and talk through our impressions, how we think some of the product and engineering decisions were made to arrive at how the thing works, and share our thoughts on how good or bad we think it is. So today's topic comes to us care of our special guest, Mare, who is here to talk to us about the frankly insane amount of software systems she interacts with in her role in HR. The list you have here is ridiculous.
It goes through my career path in different systems, but I have rolled out way too many systems for a person that should be dealing with humans.
Yeah, it is a weird mix of like you're using software to interact with people.
Yeah.
And then most of like half your interactions have to actually go through the software instead.
Yes. And that's how a lot of it's going. People want these things that allow you to like open up a ticket so that I can have less people working and just a ticket system. And it's just doesn't make much sense for HR.
Feels like it's very resource heavy and less on the human side of things. Like that's weird.
Yeah.
Some of these systems are pretty big as well. What you describe as sticky, right? Like once they're in there and you spend a few years in those systems, they're very difficult to rip out because there's just a lot of time goes by. There's a lot of data. Have you been through any major migrations where you've come in and said, hey, there's a better system and taken on that challenge of pulling something out that's that sticky?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I've been through in my current company where I've been 9 years, I think. We have gone.
Oh my gosh, has it really been 9 years?
I know. Probably just a little longer than you've known me, or a little less than you've known me. I've gone through 3 major HRIS systems, which is basically HR information system. And that's where you keep all the personnel data, right? Like the core stuff that then feeds either there's a payroll system embedded in that or it feeds your payroll system. So I've been through 3 of those, 5 performance management platforms, I think.
Sorry, can you explain when you say performance managing, can you go in a little bit of detail? How broad is that when you say performance management? Is it just doing like the annual performance reviews and monthly check-ins? Like how broad does that get?
Yeah, it can be really broad, or it can be just your annual reviews and that you roll out. But HR has gone through different cycles where it was annual review about 9 years, 10 years ago, and then they wanted to do these things because the world's speeding up, so we need to do them more frequently. So then we were doing quarterly conversations or whatever instance. Like I had a CEO who wanted to do them monthly once, and I was like, "You're out of your
Oh my
mind."
god. No, thank you.
And now then it went to quarterly, and then we've rolled it back now to 2 times a year, which is kind of the same thing as what it was before because we had this thing called a mid-year review. It's like this pendulum that keeps going back and forth. And then I would say what's different now is that people want a feedback tool, like a feedback mechanism. Like I can go in and say, "Hey, give feedback on Kevin and Andrew. I'm their boss, and I want to hear your feedback on them." So people want a system for that rather than like, "Hey, you could just email them," or "Hey, you could just call them."
Right.
You know?
And so, okay, so what you're saying is I'm the manager of Joe, and so I send Andrew a note saying, "Tell me how you think Joe is doing?"
Yeah, and different systems do it differently, whether
Sure.
the employee requests peer feedback about themselves.
Mhm.
This is just 360, right? So different platforms build in different types of 360 feedback or peer-to-peer stuff.
It's interesting because I've been fascinated with that subject for years. Where someone asked me at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, start to provide feedback for last year, and now I have to remember over 365 days. Like, cool, what did they do, right? And I've always wondered whether the captain's log was better, where it's like I'm constantly putting in information, I'm gathering feedback, which is really common overseas. I've seen some interesting systems where they're dedicated to that, and it can work. What's your impression? Have you seen that
Yeah, they
work?
have these modules like anytime feedback modules where you could at any point in time say, "Hey, I closed a project, how did I do?" Or "Hey, I need some more feedback on how I did on this thing." And I don't see an uptick in actually people using that. But when it comes down to it, unless it's in front of them in their daily platform, they're not going to go on to another platform and start living in it. So it's just until things get really embedded. But then, as you'd mentioned before, as you embed these new systems and then you try to embed different systems, the technology platforms don't talk very well. The true issue is that integration that you try to like click into different things. Like, oh, there's a Teams app. Oh,
Oh,
great.
great.
But that just adds to the noise, right? So
Well, and I'd also be curious, like in that scenario, what you've described as employee initiative versus I feel
yeah.
like Greener, you're talking about like the manager wanting to just take notes as those things occur and have a place to do that, right?
Well, no, I've actually, the most extreme case was a company out in Pune in India. And I absolutely loved the concept. They were running machine learning models on their employees, 4,000. And actually, it was a matrix. So everybody was reviewing everybody. So I could review my peers, I could review my manager would review me. And then what they do with the AI is they would adapt the teams. So it would recognize like your performance. We're getting feedback from sort of key performance indicators that you're dropping. Are you bored? Would you like to try something else? Would you like to go to a new team? And so they were continually trying to adapt their teams dynamically based on that feedback. That was the extreme. I've always kind of thought, that's tough sell, but is there a happy medium where in retrospective in agile, is that a good time to be capturing that for your sort of your peers and also your managers capturing that, but hasn't caught on anywhere I've worked.
Well, and that feels like maybe because it's 4,000 people, but is that like this is the problem I have with some of these technology things, especially around HR and just like dealing with the people that you manage. Presumably you're not managing 42 people. If you're managing 42 people, that's a weird structure in your organization, and maybe that's what was going on in a giant company of 4,000. But if you have a manageable size of team, I don't know why you need machine learning to tell you the pattern you should notice. You should notice that Steph is bored in the meetings and you need to give her something better to do. So like
I think you're overestimating some managers.
yeah, that's that's fair.
Yeah, I would agree. These were small squads. I think it's a few years now, but I'd say around 6, 7 max size. And so this was actually taking squads into account, like the actual agile squad. So
So this is solving for the fact that middle management has never been good at their jobs and we just need software to step in and try to analyze what's actually going on because we can't expect the person who failed upward to do that for us. Like
well, I think it
that's
was
a
also
That is these. I try to not make broad stereotypical, these people are bad at their jobs, but in my experience, that's kind of why I have a job. And I think more and more people they may say they like management or they care about management, but even the good ones I think are too busy given crunched resources and austerity measures to really be good at thoughtful performance management. So these systems try, I think, to bridge the gap, but they become really cumbersome. And then I've been through so many because the companies that roll them out are probably on a short leash as far as this is when you need to start making money. So I've had multiple times they pull the plug while we've rolled it out. So then you had to flip and roll out a different system.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating too, what you just said about even the good managers, the good leaders that's so busy. And I've always wondered, a lot of technical guys who are good leaders, right? Let's talk about the good ones for a second. They get promoted into positions of leadership and then they do multitask, right? They never leave the technical behind, or sometimes they get to, but often they're sucked back in. Do you think that we'd ever see a trend, or have you seen a trend where it didn't really matter about their technical background? It was much more like a West Point for the Army, where it's like, you are trained in leadership. We know you're running a technical team, but it's your leadership skills that we want. Have you seen that, or do you think we'll head there? Will we see that ever?
Like more specific, like retraining for managers that are good at the skill, but not then they move to leadership or management without.
You're not getting the promotion because you're the best engineer. You're getting the promotion because you're the person who wants to take on those leadership skills. And so you leave the real tech nerd in the senior engineering position, and the person who is actually, like, is that a.
That's so tough. It's tough because you need credibility in the position of management or leadership. So if you don't know how to do what the person that you're telling what to do, if you don't know how to do that, then they're not going to take you seriously. So you have to have like those, what they call T-shaped personality or T-shaped type of leaders who can go like super broad and go in deep if they had to.
Do you believe that, or do you believe because there are some positions in the world where it's your cabinet, you're a leader, and there's a marketing element to you. I would look at maybe the president, right? You would think, like, does that person know how to fix the economy? No. But they're going to work and they're going to deal and they're going to campaign. In business, do you think we change the rules then and we see more technical leaders who are not able to leave the job behind?
It's tough to say. I think you can find a both scenario because I don't think I could go in there and even in HR and go to a different industry. I've been in this industry for 9 years. If I go to a finance industry after advertising for 9 years, I'm not going to know how to do HR as well for finance. Generally, it's the same, but I still am going to lack a bit of credibility and know-how to be able to manage or lead. I think if you get to the very top, it's sometimes more important to be it's obviously more important to be a good leader than to know how to do the jobs beneath you.
It feels like it's a scale, like, or not scale, like
It
a
depends.
level issue, right? Like, it's where are you in the org? If you are the director overseeing both data science and engineering and, the UI team, maybe you're not going to be as deep on data science and UI, and that could be okay because you are good at the leadership and the getting people rallied over goals and all of that kind of stuff. Versus if you're the UI manager, you're probably half the time in the trenches, even if you're not writing code with them. You're still like helping them clear blockers and troubleshoot what's going on with them. And if you don't have that depth, then it probably is hard, right?
Yeah, and that's actually my current boss right now. Don't listen to this. No. She's great. She actually doesn't have an HR background. She's evolved into it, but her leadership capacity is good enough that she's dangerous in it. And she's intelligent enough to, I'm not just fluffing her up, but intelligent enough to learn what we do and help.
That's probably that big push around transformative skills, right? Because I think, man, you probably could, you might be underselling yourself. I think we probably could pluck you out of the world you're in, and it may be the skills that you didn't anticipate building up and saying, well, actually, I can survive in finance, but I've really gravitated towards this. Because I think a lot of leaders do have those transformative skills, right, when they move.
Yes.
The other thing I'd say with technology, which is kind of weird, is, Kevin, if I was to dump you into a world with a bunch of languages that you didn't know, I'm not sure it would impact either of us not being able to understand running a dev team who are working in a language that we don't understand. Would you agree or push back on that?
I that's so subjective, I think, because it really, if I don't know Java and PHP, unfortunately I know both, so but if I don't know one of those and the patterns though aren't different, versus I think I would struggle to manage a team of mobile web developers, right? Like, I have no idea how mobile engineering works, and I would be totally worthless to them. I could not help them troubleshoot process and bugs, and like I would not be able to help in a way that I could look at the pattern of the database connection and the Python code and understand enough about what's going on there. So yes and no, it really sort of depends. But I do think this is where I'd be curious if this is a thing that needs to change in HR perceptions and in how teams, especially engineering team, work, which is those sort of applicable skills don't need to be the words in the bullet points on the resume don't need to match up. It's a vibe check. If you're a back end engineering manager or engineer who wants to become a manager, and this company is C Sharp and SQL, and you are coming from Python and MySQL, actually, oh, anyway, you should be able to do like the vibe check of that should match up versus, oh, I'm going to be going from the mobile app engineer to the data center big data person. No, I don't think those are necessarily transferable. So I don't know, it feels like shades of gray.
Well, I think with leadership, they've often missed the boat in what's actually needed. I have some colleagues who think it's, ability to wield power. And I have I go back to way, way, way long ago when I decided to get into this. And, the big five, I think it was, the thing that determines success and ability and potential actually is conscientiousness. And I think a lot of good leaders who can go in different worlds are able to really absorb detail and really understand the world that they're living in and then help make it better. My boss, who's not been in HR, generally speaking, she's challenging a lot of us to not just be like admins or paper pushers or typical HR, like I call you when I don't understand my 401k, those types of things. Like, what can HR actually evolve to be? And I think it does take a different kind of leader to try to get that done.
And I'd be curious, that type of leader, sort of to Andrew, your point earlier, I feel like a performance management system that helped me just take a quick note. It was, I'm not going to do full UI design here, but a little bit. Like there was a little thing that was just always somewhere and I could just, oh yeah, Lauren just did this amazing thing. Note, submit. I'm going to see that 6 months from now when it's time to do it. And I won't have to remember like all of those things. If the managers had the support to be on top of that, because I don't know, personally, I think I do an okay job on the leadership side, but I know I'm not the best note taker and I'm not conscientious of remembering that. I am like scrounging my brain to at the end of the 6-month period to figure that out. So I feel like performance management is going down this road of let's automate the human interaction, and I'm like, no, can we just support the people do their human interactions better?
Yeah, no, I don't. And even performance management itself, people don't know how to write good reviews. People don't know, and a lot of the AI tools I'm seeing actually help you find words, right? Like, how do I say this feedback? Which is kind of alarming. I think that we struggle with some of these just baseline human skills. I really think our human skills need a lot of work, especially now.
It's almost like what we need is the AI to read the review you just wrote and be like, actually, tone is difficult in text, so here's some recommendations of what you're going to do to not sound like a total monster. You could help people build up those skills, but yeah, it feels very much like in 5 years, is everyone going to get the same weird ChatGPT manager review because they're just clicking the third option that the AI gave them to populate the review and move on to the next employee?
Yeah, I've seen systems actually do that where it like gives you a different way to like almost like that text that starts to fill in for you. And you're like,
Sure.
whoa. It does kind of, a lot of people get scared of AI like replacing their jobs. And for us on the HR side, I think we would in some ways welcome a little less job security.
All right, let's keep going through the software you use.
Yeah.
So then the third one you had in here was engagement surveys. And I was
Yeah.
sort of curious. So, at least in companies I've been in, there's also like performance management as a way of noting performance, engagement and surveys as ways of collecting feedback. And then it seems like there's sometimes like a fourth one, because I'm skipping past HRIS and payroll, which is like recognition and doing like we do like thank you Thursdays and all of that kind of stuff. And am I just not understanding that maybe so we're on, should I say we're on SAP SuccessFactors.
Yeah.
The SuccessFactors have a crappy recognition tool and we just aren't using it. But it feels like one of those things that wouldn't you want performance management and engagement tools to have those things built in so you can just see, oh, I'm reviewing Sarah. She got 7 points of thank you Thursdays. She's clearly doing well. Like,
Yes.
what's going on there?
There are standalone recognition platforms that you can buy. or use. There's ones that do get embedded like this one system mindset, but none of those one system setups really do any of those features well because I think they only know how to master one. Like I often see together like performance and engagement. And then like this is an example use case. We had our last platform sold us really strongly that you'll be able to see based on performance and engagement data if your top performers are your most engaged or you have an engagement problem of the people most critical to your organization. And they sold this to us super hard. And then they did not develop the system to actually make those connections until they determined actually it's really hard to do performance management well. We're going to sunset this. And sorry, we're going to be kicking you off
Amazing.
the performance platform. So they try and they want to develop, and there may be one that I haven't. Like I know Workday's kind of when I was coming up was the up and coming platform. I've actually never worked in it, so there could be systems that manage this, but there are very few systems that do everything very well and that are also able to snap into a complex organization like the one I'm currently in. That have like it's not just a department structure; it's a matrix agency organization.
So here's my big question for you, because it goes along with, I've always gravitated towards the operational side of technology, enterprise architect today, because I like building, the company's technology and I like looking at the processes. Do you feel like there's enough engineering heads applied to the problems in human resources and how the business, like those generic domains that every business has? I always feel like nobody wants to do it. It's not sexy. I want to work on customer facing things. And so the company the foundation suffers because we don't have those engineering minds on that. Has that been your experience?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I've rolled out every performance platform pretty much by myself with like other HR team members who don't have that kind of brain for it. They're great at a lot of things, but when we talk about tech or engineering or operational support, we have very little resources to do that. You don't have a whole lot of operationally data savvy folks, tech savvy folks helping you roll out HR platforms.
And then I feel like when you go to the end of the river, if we consider that the top of the mountain, when you get to the end of the river where there's the sprints and you got products like Jellyfish where we're measuring the KPIs and metrics of engineers and how they deliver in teams, I feel like we cheated it. I feel like the foundation was to first of all get the performance, do things like we're talking about, which is making it easy for Kevin to provide feedback all year and hit the button and say, hey, quick one-liner. But all of that sort of churns through those systems, and then you do have that natural flow down to Jellyfish where you say, well, of course they're not performing well, right? Look, we've been getting a lot of feedback. It's showing at the end of the line in their sprint reviews, and I just feel like there's a disconnect there. And it's weird.
Well, and also just there's so many pieces of this. Like you were saying earlier, they all try to do a little bit of everything and therefore they do everything poorly.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Like these companies are somehow massive billion-dollar companies. Like these are massive names getting involved in this, and yet they all do all of this poorly because it's a thing that they try to sell you with 72 possible add-on modules that you can get to do this, that,
Oh
and the other
yeah.
thing. Of course, 68 of them are going to be terrible because what the hell? But then it's because human interaction is complex. How are you going to evaluate the relationship between the review you got in March and the performance you're seeing in September, and you're not aware of the family crisis that happened in August and all of these things? Why are we expecting software to do that? And I get it because managers don't know how to manage, and so we're trying to put up, this feels like our agile conversation where every time something goes wrong, our solution is not to actually figure out what's core going wrong. We
Yeah.
need to make people better people managers. We need to add more software processes, and now we'll add the 15th component to our HR system and that'll solve it. No, it won't. No, it won't.
Well, I have a question for Maya. What you just said, one of the things that struck me about the company in India was the fact, and I actually told them I thought it was going to be a problem for them to sell in the US because they were collecting data that I would consider overstepping the mark, right? It was too personal. Do you think that we should be collecting some of that data when it's volunteered? Like, should that be going into the churn, which helps you realize, yeah, this person has genuine issues outside the office, and that should be taken into consideration in the data?
Absolutely not. Well, that's just a very HR answer. It is like kind of what lives in our brains it's so personal information, and in other regions, like say outside of the US, you cannot collect pieces of data like that as well. So it just gets really it's important, but it's sticky.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting though, right? Because isn't your understanding of that situation and then behaving differently a recognition of that system anyway? You're already doing it, right? You
Yeah.
don't have the data going into a system, but as humans, we take into account things we know, which could be viewed positively, but it's a weird situation where it's like, well, I've almost overstepped my mark ethically to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I have this weird thing with, all these privacy laws and things like that. In HR, the more you put down in writing sometimes, the less protected the company can get. And the more data you collect about people, the more likely that that person, if that employment goes badly, they will say, "You use that data against me." You just see this side of humans that they get very paranoid, they get very accusatory, they assume they start throwing out words like toxic workplace, discrimination, all of these things that at the end of the day, it's mostly just humans being humans. There are obviously toxicity and discrimination. There's obviously stuff like that that happens, and I've seen it. But a lot of times it's, what's that thing where it's like not often discriminatory, it's just like incompetence.
Well, but and I think that's a good example of the reason that the phrase is a bad apple ruins the bunch is not to excuse the rest of the apples. It is to say that the one bad apple actually makes it so because there was a crappy boss who used the fact that you had a death in the family to then be like, well, you're not doing your work, so I'm going to fire you, then means everyone is punished because you don't know how to distinguish between knowing too much personal information is blanket. You have no way of knowing whether or not that actually was the reason why somebody made a bad decision. And to your point, 9 times out of 10, it is a stupid person making a stupid decision, not a bigoted decision. But because there's no way to actually apply that as a blanket rule, we collectively just say HR is going to tell you stay out of that kind of stuff to protect yourself and the company and the employee. And that's a really tricky balancing act that I don't know how you get around, especially as more of these systems are starting to be more aware of all of your
Yeah.
data. And now it's even worse because is my personal information not just aware to my manager and my HR team, but now it's in a data center in Google somewhere. And if Google probably isn't going to get hacked, but if the startup little HR company that we got a discount from, and so we went with them and their little data center gets hacked, now my personal information is available to the hackers. There's a level of trust, not just of human beings, but also the systems. I don't know. It gets real complex with people, and then you add technology on top of it. I don't know how you're supposed to trust that right now. Maybe in 20 years when we have end-to-end encryption doing magic things that we can all believe in. But
So many of our systems are still fed by like someone doing work on an Excel spreadsheet. Like it's not right, like,
sure.
and those things can be sent and downloaded and accessed if you're not careful.
Do you think, and again, here's my distrust of humans. Do you think that not even do you think that businesses appreciate the complexity and the power of the employees, right? Because there's such a focus on revenue and there's such a focus at the end of the line where the products are being built and DevOps and all these new ops, right? And there's all this sophisticated new processes. And yet we look at the people where, the actual management of the people and the data behind those people. And for me, the assumption has always been it's just like a general lack of caring about those types of sciences, right? Like organizational therapy and psychology. Like businesses just don't have any value in those things. It's like they don't, it's like, yeah, there's a couple of employees that have these issues. It's like, well, actually, if you get enough of them, though, it systematically breaks down, right? Like, especially in important positions, when you get people that are struggling in important positions, they can affect the people that in their reporting chain, right? And then you can start to see toxicity and even, cancers in your company, right? Do you think there's just a general lack of understanding, caring there?
Definitely, especially in revenue generating, billable type operations, where if you're not making money, if you're not 90% billable, then maybe we can't afford you. And maybe we need to eliminate a position. And that's done on such a short-term looking lens where they don't necessarily realize those people are spending 10 hours doing management and maybe some degree of infrastructure and department development and, thinking about their career maps or whatever they're doing to build a team that works, because a team that works is not just focused on a client. You have to build infrastructure. And I think most companies, think too simply about what a person does in that job.
That's a good segue. I don't think Kevin's watched it. The show Billions.
No.
Yeah. So there's actually a character in the show called Wendy. She's a medical doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, and it's interesting for me because when I look at her role in the company in the show, it's one of the things that I've always been interested. Could HR ever get to that point where she's sort of the in-house shrink? She helps fine-tune the traders, and it definitely works in finance more, right? When you think about it, where it's like, hey, I've got to have these sort of bloodthirsty killers go out there every day, and it's high stress. But one of the things I've always been fascinated with is that companies don't seem to have psychologists on staff. Is that just a sensitivity problem? Like,
Yeah, they
A
don't.
legal problem?
Yeah, it is. It's more so, the GDPR does, limits what companies can do a lot of, probably in good ways. We always say we're not the camp counselor. We're not your therapist. We can't be, because we're still going to be the people that actually fire you if we have to. Right? We're going to be the people in a room. So if you just told me that you have everything about you, and then I'm the person standing there or sitting there or hiding behind a Zoom call, witnessing a terrible moment in your life, you're going to think that I knew, I used something against you.
but we can have two on staff, one for the listening and one for the firing, right? And I joke, but
Well, right.
this is the
Yes.
current model,
There you
right?
go.
But are we just scared to change? Like, is the privacy laws,
Yeah.
have we become too sensitive? Do we need to go through an evolution or even a revolution in human resources to say, yeah, fair enough,
Yeah.
we're not going to do individual sessions with a counselor, but we do want somebody who specializes in, you're going from 50 to 100 people, and that's why you're seeing a drop of performance in this whole region of the companies, because guess what? The new guys coming in, they're working against this old culture of this camaraderie these guys had when there were 20 of them, and they feel like outsiders. Like,
Yeah.
it's just somebody who can look at the overall picture, who's trained in hive mentalities. And
Well, I'll go full geek on you all and be like, that is why Deanna Troi was the ship counselor on Star Trek The Next Generation, because she was outside of the chain of command and was able to be that
Right.
person who didn't have to get in the way of,
Yes.
well, okay, but now you're getting court-martialed for the horrible thing you just confessed to her. She didn't tell anybody, but they found out, and
Yes.
she doesn't have to deal with that side of it.
I absolutely think that you like, and some companies, like, you might think like learning and development, right? Are people that can help with like performance coaching. That's usually like a very small amount of people. They roll out management training, and they roll out some skill trainings and development programs, such like that. I've always thought you needed to separate those out so that you have a lot more divide between the things that need to be kind of mediated in an organization, those employee relations issues, against the kind of, how do we make people who are performing well and generally in the right roles, how do we make them more successful? And like, a lot of HR is focused on the mediation and the things like the hiring and the removing and the protecting the organization from, when we remove people and when we don't hire people, we need to protect the organization from kind of bad actors.
one of my other more controversial ideas, other than psychologists, I actually think they'd be good in interviews as well. They don't say anything; they just sit in the corner and make notes, and then
Yeah.
tell me at the end, how was my performance and how was theirs? Like, how anxious were they? Was it getting through? Was it a good interview? So it's as much about proving the company's interviewing skills as it is about, because I always feel weird, right? I feel like I'm interviewing at times young kids right out of college, and the first thing I really want to do is tell them, like, you're anxious, you've got a script, you think you've got to stick to it, and I want to tear that all down and tell you I'm the most down-to-earth person in the world. Let's just talk and get to that. What do you love? What
Right.
do you enjoy doing? Let's talk about that. And I've always wanted a psychologist in the room, so that's bad idea number one, maybe.
I
My
kind of like
second
that
idea.
one. I don't mind that one.
You're okay with that one?
I like
My
that.
second idea has been more of a global HR system, which is LinkedIn on steroids. So it's like you get company hoppers, right? And some of us are just startup guys who've been acquired 6, 7 times. And then you sort of get to that level of senior management where you're maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and then you're a builder, not a maintainer, right? And I wonder if like a global system that tracks me, where companies can go in there and actually see my career performance review. Would that ever catch on?
Other companies seeing other.
Yeah, like, imagine if your HR system like fed into his LinkedIn profile so that anyone else in the future could get
It's beautiful.
all of that review stuff.
Absolutely not.
You see, it should though, right? Because
Yeah.
it should, because it's a better world with it. But we've become so sensitive in privacy that people can't see the advantage on both sides.
We sue for everything. So
going back to like the global data, like if I'm going to argue for anything that should become a global thing first, it would be healthcare, because it does seem like a good 2/3 of HR time is being
Ugh,
my healthcare admin for something.
don't
It's
get me
real weird.
started. Don't get me started. I would divorce it
Like, why is that your
entirely.
job?
It should never
Yeah.
have been our jobs, and I don't know enough to be your and most of these systems now are managed outside of HR, and we're just the go-between. So like
Hmm.
I don't know what an employee's copay is right now. I don't know what their deductible is. I know what mine is. Most people don't. Most people don't look at their pay stubs. So if that too, just
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I cannot wait for the day that healthcare is not coupled with employment. I find it gross, horrific, and a waste of my time.
It's the one thing Bernie Sanders is correct about.
Uh, yeah,
We're
that's
not getting,
that's
yeah.
another that's a whole
Uh,
call. That's a series of
That's
calls.
another
Yeah.
podcast.
all
I will
whack.
say this. I do
Yeah.
agree. I don't. This is not a joke. I don't know how much I get paid now. I know the region. I don't know how much I get paid now, and I don't know how much I got paid at the last company. I don't look at those things, right? Because I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but I do love what I do, right? I hope my current company is
Yep.
not listening, but I would do it for free, right? I'd do something. And I'm kind of half joking, but
I would not start now.
I need the puzzle. I need to burn the data. You've got to put my brain to work.
Yeah.
So, in a new society where I can sit home and just play guitar and paint pictures all day, that's perfect because I'm burning the data doing that. The healthcare puts you guys in a crazy position where now you're getting the wrath, right? You're getting people at their most
Yep.
heated. By the time I get to the person who can actually help me, I've already calmed down because I've taken it out on you guys, right?
Yes, yes, yes. We have, and I keep saying this to my team. I'm like, the company values and code of conduct also applies to you, right? So if an employee starts treating you a certain way, you don't have to just cake it. Like you can say, hey, we're gonna end this call because I've already told you I'm not responsible for that, and I'm gonna hang up now. I'm not taking this abuse.
That
Nice.
brings me to idea number 3. Do you think like quarrels in companies could be solved with some kind of gamification? So in the
Yeah.
extreme sense, it could be a cage match. We're years away from that. And that's a Joe Rogan podcast, right? But could some of the problems and challenges between employees be gamified where you have tension, they have tension, you don't hate each other. We're going to gamify this whole thing. Is there anything in the human resources movement that includes gamification for conflict resolution?
Ooh.
Like, what's an example? We do
Get on.
pub trivia night, and the winner of pub trivia night gets to have their way, and they get to write the code with curly braces on the
And
same
it
line,
sounds
not on the next
crazy.
line.
It does sound crazy, but a lot of companies kind of encourage that. Hey, we want you to decorate your cubes and pick a house from Harry Potter, and we'll make it competitive. And that's just competitive nature day to day, where it's like, it's just fun. I've got an identity. I'm part of a pod,
Yep.
but we're competing against those guys. So now it's not much of a leap to say, cool, let's start to address like there's conflict between product and technology. And then you start to see things like, well, let's take a day trip and go paintballing together. So
Yeah.
that's a gamification of a complex problem in a company, right? But I haven't really seen that on the software side.
I haven't seen it on the software side. I've seen attempts for gamification of like just basic trainings.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
haven't seen it in like a true mediation type because I think when the conflict gets to the point of intervention, again, it needs to be solved with human skills. I think you need to actually diagnose what the conflict is and understand that most of that can be solved if it's not a pure personality conflict by understanding the system they're working in and the aims that each person has that are putting them at conflict. So most of it I think can be diagnosed with a kind of a group setting of conversation and those kind of silly team building type workshops.
Yeah, it's so much less fun for everybody else to watch on a Friday
Yeah.
afternoon. If you can be like, hey, Charles from product and Michelle from engineering are going to go at it on the Xbox, straight knockout, 3 rounds to settle their differences.
Yeah.
Because quite often the conflict resolution, one of my disappointments in human resources has been, hey, have you tried to talk to this person one-on-one? And my feeling is, isn't that your job, right? Like, you want me to go resolve my issue with the person I have an issue with? Cool, at very least you could be there. But conflict resolution in companies, I'm continually kind of,
That's really interesting because often it depends on the severity, I think, like of the
Yep.
conflict. My view is that HR is not here to be the humans that you can't be. But There are some points where it kind of gets a little almost HR press a button. Have you talked to them about it? It's like response number one in the HR playbook.
And it's kind of like what we were saying earlier about like if the line manager doesn't have the skill set to do the review and doesn't have the skill set to understand that, then if the person who is having conflict doesn't have the human skill set to resolve conflict, it falls on the company for some reason to teach them to be a better interactive human being. And that I'm saying that maliciously and kind of understandably. You're a person who hasn't had to deal with an engineer who has had 30 years in the industry and thinks they know everything on themselves, and you have no personal life skills that would teach you how to deal with that person. So does that become not necessarily your HR person's fault, but is that the company should be, here's the thing, go talk to your Deanna Troy, who's going to give you some recommendations on how to have that conversation. Go watch the video that explains the tactics you could use. Like, are there things we could do to make people more equipped to do that? Which, again, if I go pure, every once in a while I go pure like capitalist, I'm like, that is not the company's responsibility. But
Yeah.
we are human beings working with human beings, and so it's somebody's responsibility. I don't know.
Well, I think it's part of it's a good thing to have in a company, but I think the company's responsibility is to resolve the things that are putting people in conflict, which is because it's often the system, right? It's often development wants to get this done by this date and do a real. Let me use an example of something I understand. Creative wants to produce the best fucking creative. Sorry, can I curse?
You can, but I'm just gonna
You're gonna
bleep it. I'm
bleep
gonna
it.
bleep it. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
they want
Yeah.
to produce the best creative and win that creative award and be known as like the top creative, right? They want to produce, game-changing work. The account person on that account wants to have the best relationship with that client and win us more business and revenue and grow the business. So you've got two separate aims, putting both of these groups which work every day together at conflict. So the company and the leadership's job in that instance is to collide those aims into one. What are we trying to achieve here? Not resolve the personality conflicts of people who are just built different. Like, how do we make them point in the same direction? And that's what I think companies need to spend more time doing, right? Not necessarily training conflict skills because those are important, but like people are going to be people. And if you're an asshole, you're going to get fired. If you're genuinely wanting to do a good job, but just having a conflict with someone, then you need to resolve why you're having that conflict, not like necessarily change people or fix people.
I totally agree, except I don't see enough assholes get fired.
Agree.
I guess that's one of
Yes.
my biggest gripes for 25 years has been not enough assholes get fired.
Yeah.
You can apologize, a couple of times, but if you can't play nice, we shouldn't have to invest time and money to stop you from being an asshole. Right?
We're completely aligned. I always say you get one asshole warning, but you don't get two.
Well, that could be gamified though, right? That could be like voted off the island. Like, hey, this person interacts with these 62 people,
Right.
and those 62 people anonymously, it's all of them, right? But they anonymously vote that person off, and hey, guess what? That asshole's gone.
Mm,
I don't know. I feel like
yeah.
it's almost like not enough attention. We don't care. We're busy. We're chasing the bottom line. We're too sensitive. And I don't know. I would like to see more pruning.
Often the assholes stay because they are the person that can do that thing so well. They're
The
like
hero.
they're the
The hero.
hero. It's like, and I'm always like, I don't care how good they are at their job because they're neglecting 50% of their job by actually making 4 people cry per day. Like
Yeah.
Well, and what
Yeah.
surprises me is in those situations, like I feel like companies pay lip service to, well, we all take the Myers-Briggs survey, so we all know where we fit with each other and how we all work together. And I feel like companies go down the road of, we're not quite gamifying it to have the island vote you off, but they're putting these systems in place to try and help you do these things. And one, Myers-Briggs, total bullshit. All of these systems, every once in a while they line up,
Ooh.
but no.
Yeah, no,
Like
I
it's
agree.
it's horoscopes.
I know.
It's horoscopes for business
Well,
dudes.
it's not based on anyway. Yeah. Psych.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do a small sub episode with Mayor on the history of Myers-Briggs and why it's total nonsense.
Yeah.
But it feels like that kind of thing where like the company is seeking, and I will give at least the company credit, they're seeking solutions to what are the things we could do to help people interact with each other better. But I do think most of the time it is fire the jerk and clear the barriers for the teams who are butting heads unnecessarily.
Yep.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that goes back to what Maya's point earlier. I think I've seen this at many companies where they do these tests on the way in, but then the lack of technical resources to take them to the next level. And I was at one company where they actually built it into their whole instant messaging chat, where
Hmm.
it's like, hey, I'm about to have a meeting with a Kevin, blah blah blah, and it would bring up your chat. So I knew, I was talking to Kevin, and this is the type of personality he was, and that was about the furthest I've ever seen a human resources organization take that. And I think it's great intention, but then the lack of sort of technical support and engineering
Yeah.
giving a shit about that kind of thing, it just dies. That's it. Right? It's
Agreed.
done.
I'm not mad at that idea. Like, I know they just put Copilot into Microsoft Teams to do like note taking. I'm not mad at the idea of a little AI is aware of a bunch of things about all of these people, and a sidebar only visible to me pops up and is like,
Right.
Jordan is the type of person who could not care how your weekend went. Feel free to just start the meeting.
Right.
Versus, oh, actually, you and Andrew need to spend 10 minutes talking about the kids and what we did at soccer and all that kind of stuff, because that's the only way you're going to get him comfortable in introducing this topic to him, right? Like,
Right.
I'm actually kind of okay with software helping us in those areas.
Me too. And I would
Yeah.
love to see, I know Microsoft also has like an analytics platform, right? Where you can see how many emails you've sent and who's how many times you've, ended a meeting early or gone over time or been late to one or been multitasking during a meeting and all those things. And I actually think that data could be really interesting for a manager on their team members to say, I don't want it as a productivity tool necessarily. I want it to know like John has been like really burning the midnight oil and is close to burnout. And I want it to know those types of things so that we don't step in it and just ignore, especially in this world, like you don't see people, you don't know how they're doing. I would like to use those kinds of tools that like even close a meeting, what you talk about so you remember it next time.
Well, and I think there's interesting signals in that. Andrew is multitasking during the meetings that are always led by Kevin. Well, maybe the topic that he keeps getting pulled into with Kevin is just not the thing that's going to keep him around. And
Yeah.
we're not telling you that's a signal he's about to quit, but you might want to check why he's not that engaged with the topic that keeps coming up this way. Like, that would be super helpful as a manager.
To me, this is one of the top use cases for data. Never mind the AI piece. I think the AI piece is the cherry and the icing on the cake. But
Mhm.
meeting fatigue is just real, right? I think 67% of people said that they, if they could
Yep.
do less meetings, much more productivity. But I love what you said, Mayor, because I imagine a little snap into the side of my meeting, which is telling me this person's attended, 12 hours of meetings in the last week and has actually talked for 3 minutes or has contributed to the chat. I would love those analytics because we often, I still remember in leadership positions where it's like, get the best out of the meeting, take the opportunity to ask two people who haven't spoken, what do they think, right? It's just a tactic.
Yep.
And if I had those analytics at my fingertips to say, hey, let me pull this person in, like, are they okay? And certainly if that person was talkative and productive and then dropped off a week ago, it's like,
Yep.
okay, is this something I should be concerned about? But again, is it that kind of analytics going to fly in this country where people are concerned about privacy and I don't want them to know I talk in meetings? Like they're tracking me.
Right.
That goes back to our agile conversation about most of your issues aren't with agile. You have a crappy manager. So,
Yeah.
like, this would be helpful information for a good manager, but it would be weaponized by a bad manager. And so, how much is this the bad apple ruins the bunch? We can't turn this on because even though I'm not going to say 80-20, 60-40 of our managers are good versus bad, the 40% are going to ruin it for the 60%.
But would it also help weed out bad managers? Because you could also see their data and say, I know that,
Sure.
Jerry only talks to his employees like once a quarter. And like those conversations
Right.
are like, he doesn't do the reviews. He doesn't actually care about them.
Right.
And that is really interesting because I imagine, and this will never fly, but here's my crazy idea. If I had a dashboard with a little, just this simple, with an emoji of my employees' mental happiness at that company, that would drive so many managers to work much harder to understand why are they not smiling anymore. You would feel called out if that dashboard was in, you walk in the lobby and there's a dashboard and I see my team and I see them all unhappy. I would feel compelled to act and understand and just do things that
Oh,
bad
yeah.
managers don't do and say, hey guys, is everything okay? It's like, no, we had to work the weekend and you didn't even bother responding to the ticket and
Right.
lead us, right? And we seem so sensitive to have that type of, and mine's an extreme idea, but I do think we need to find a way to root out the people who actually care about leading and the people.
Yep. No, I agree. And then the things that could fix things are often the things that then, get weaponized or used
Yeah.
against us, or employees think they will be used against them, so they fight against it. So while we're not employee friendly as other regions here in the US, every organization's working to conservatively to protect themselves, not necessarily to build a happy culture.
Well, I wondered when you were talking earlier about the idea of like a global LinkedIn that anybody could go and figure out, like, how's this person doing? I've wondered if there's a version of that that's just the positive reviews. And so the fact that your team isn't on the leaderboard is a pretty important signal for you, but we're not necessarily explicitly telling you you have 9 out of 10 people who are unhappy with you, but your team also isn't in the top 10 happiest teams either. And so if your global review of Andrew only had 2 positive reviews, that's an indicator. We're not telling you why he did a bad thing, but we're also, I mean, read the writing on the wall.
That's a great idea, though, right? Like, if you think about it, if productivity could be boiled down to global KPIs, again, it's a gamification opportunity where Squad Yuland out in some financial company is top of the charts this week against a bunch of guys who from Biogen, where it's like squad number 2 in second place this week for productivity. If you could boil things down to global metrics on productivity and sentiment and all of that good stuff that AI is going to give us, you could take these things and gamify them, where it's like, hey, congratulations, you were like the most successful team in your city, regardless of sector. You win $50,000. Yeah, this is my startup idea, technically. So I just want to.
TM, TM, TM.
Well,
This is
yeah, don't worry about
great.
it. That's not
We'll edit this
anywhere.
out.
Kevin and I are not looking at that.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that's an interesting, like, even if we don't go start up global capability, the ability to have, sort of to your point, just like you would possibly be motivated by the person seeing all the frowny faces. And I don't even mind the idea of the managers. I don't know, the managers could suck, so maybe you do need to only do the positive thing. But that absence of, in my company, my team is not showing up on the leaderboard at all, could be an equal motivator to
Yeah.
Absolutely.
seeing the frowny faces. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we've been going for an hour and a half. I've got enough that I could edit this into a single episode, and we haven't even talked about your software complaints.
Ooh.
So I feel like you and I have talked about a couple of things. There have been these single solutions that are trying to do everything for everybody, and therefore they do nothing for no one.
Yeah.
And then the actual day to day of just usability as just a, like, how are you all, if this is the place that you're all supposed to live, it doesn't sound like these software systems are actually designed to be a happy place for HR people to spend 6 hours of their 8 hours a day, which is mind boggling. And then you also complained about you're exporting Excel spreadsheets and then importing them once you've done 3 weeks of manual things to do something. So how is it possible that these systems don't talk to one another?
They do to some. They're horrible. Don't get me wrong. Like I know a lot of these systems, and a lot of them are horrible.
Yeah.
They do talk to each other, and I think the point we talked about earlier on is there's no appetite to actually integrate them. I have a system at work today that integrates into one of these big platforms, but now I got to go motivate a team that has no technical expertise and say, hey, do you want to be a stakeholder in this big project to link your data up with this? And there's no appetite from them because it's like they're excited, like, oh, that would be amazing. We'd love to send you our data. We have no resources to do it.
I think that's right. The desire to really build it like an infrastructure. And the problem isn't often sometimes the system, it's often the internal data and the internal organization, how you share data, who needs data, how do you build that into a system with lots of controls, how do you make that data?
Are these companies, at least I've seen situations. So my mom worked at a place that did a giant SAP rollout, and
Yeah.
SAP was like, sure, here's the whatever $20 million software contract, and then here's the $10 million implementation contract. And so, like, I'm also curious how much of this is just these massive systems, and even if you do pay for the basic installation, they show up for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
get something going, and then it's up to you to actually figure out, now we're doing Delta files in Excel because the way it was configured only handled the first 5 scenarios and doesn't deal with the next 3.
Oh yeah, and I'm pretty sure that implementation itself, like some companies don't even offer implementation support. So it's just kind of bananas. It's a banana land over in HR software land.
Have you ever tried to address that strategically and said, hey, I would really like to build a technology team to work on the business applications that you're in charge of? Have you tried that and has no traction?
Well, I think to do that, I have proposed like types of roles in that way. And I think to get there, you have to figure out a different way to streamline because you're never going to get another resource in HR. You're going to say, oh, your head count's 100. You got to keep it at 100 across your various, to figure out how to make that happen. So to do that, you need to kind of turn some resources into other resources. So I would.
Yeah, you could let 5 people go tomorrow and hire a guy like me, right? But that's the challenge is the type of technologist that's going to bring you that value from that type of enterprise architecture, generally expensive. So that is a challenge. But
Yes.
I think that paradigm has to change to see any kind of improvement, right? And I do remember there was a product I always think of it as called an omnibus. It's an integration platform for applications and business applications. And I think their whole premise was that they could bring that type of technology to teams like yourselves where it's like, hey, look, we've got this old dated payroll system. We want to get the data from that into this other system, but there's 3 other systems downstream and we want to connect them all together. But you still need technologists to make that happen.
You do.
And it's almost like in order to buy our 3 HR systems, we then need to buy the 4th data integrator system. And that thing has to be point and click because all I have is HR specialists to help me do that.
We have a thing that feeds from the HR system, and it's supposed to update the back-end user identity system that feeds like what Kevin looks like in an email system, like Kevin's the VP of whatever. That actually broke or wasn't, where it was actually just a manual process by the tech team. So like we noticed like 6 months ago, like no one's title's getting updated in the technology suite. Like what's going on? And they're like, oh, we just stopped doing that because we're moving to a different integration platform. And I'm like, I cannot.
Yeah, and see that's interesting because it's not even regarded as a production system then, right? Like if that was a customer facing system that has
Oh yeah.
SLAs and tech teams and spot and you're getting called in the night, but on the human resources side and payroll
No.
side, it's kind of like we changed the system, we forgot to tell you.
Whoops.
It'll be back up.
Right.
It'll be back up in a couple of years.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
send me the file. I'm like, from when? And then that system, when it gets fixed, actually, so that HR system, the titles actually feed the financial systems to determine pay rates for what we bill our clients, right? So when that breaks, oh, all hell breaks loose. And then
Sure.
we get follow up upon follow up. And I'm like, I don't know. We updated the title in the HR system 6 months ago and it didn't go to the financial system like it should. And so now you've been billing at a lower rate.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like we ignore these things. They
Yeah.
just companies do it and it's to me it's always I look at it as like it's part of the foundation, right? It's like the people's well-being, it's them getting paid, it's the attributes of the most we say they're our most prized asset is our people. And it's like, is it though? Like you can't even get their name right or their title right and you can't link their data and there's a poster on the wall and I'm supposed to believe I'm important, but we've invested no money to help the people who take care of us every day. We've invested no money to help them do a better job of that. You can see why I hate humans.
Right? I know. No, it's all contrary to what we say we are. And that's where that's the rub where I get really angry. I am trying to make a system better for humans. Like I don't want to deal with messy humans. I want to make happy humans.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to because you're just kind of trying to catch things before they fall.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. Thanks again to Mare for coming and joining us for that conversation, and looking forward to having her back on a future episode. If you liked what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember, the name of the podcast is Stop Podcasting Yourself. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. And a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app just updated everything and now it's terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking a coworker or something. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the one we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at acceptancepod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog there. We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptancecriteria, and I promise we'll be moderating the crap out of it to keep it a nice little slice of the internet. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.